So, where are we now? Where are we now? With conflict kicking off in the Ukraine between them and Russia for whatever reason, that's really not the purpose of what we're getting into. You're going to find that a lot of outlets and whatnot are going to be pointing that direction. They're going to be talking about what's going on. What I am really concerned about here is a couple of opinion pieces that I've seen, and there was even one article by CNN itself, I suppose. Let me take a look at this. How the Ukraine War exposes Western media bias. And this was apparently through CNN itself, through a couple of people with obvious sounding names here. Abbas Al-Lawanti and Nadine Ibrahim and whatever. And then there was an opinion piece that I saw earlier today as well. I can't remember who it was through. But basically, they're trying to bring the whole racist narrative to the Ukraine conflict. So, you've got what is effectively... you've got what is effectively, race grifters now trying to attach their narrative to a conflict where people are dying. Now, the thing is that the way the media has been lying all these years, I'm not going to necessarily outright trust a damn thing anyone says. All I do know is that there is a conflict, there was an invasion, people are dying, and that's bad. But in regards to who is winning the conflict, by dint of Boy Who Cried Wolf, I can't necessarily believe any kind of hell yeah. I want to say propaganda, like that's my first instinct, because of how long they've been lying all these years. That to think that just any kind of quote-unquote news is real, and everyone talks about, celebrating how Russia is getting its ass kicked and they can't take Ukraine and whatnot, and they're abandoning all these vehicles and whatnot every which way, front and center. I honestly don't know, because then it's kind of conflicting against the narrative, that native Ukrainians are, dying horrifically in this war, and they're targeting civilians and whatnot. They say they're doing that, but I have yet to hear of any kind of... See, this is the thing. When it comes to civilian casualties, it's all bad when there's civilian casualties. But usually that's kind of the end result of kind of this heavy, heavy warfare. And when I'm talking heavy warfare, I'm talking when you bring in things with high collateral damage. Bombing runs, artillery strikes, rocket strikes, etc. Things that don't necessarily discriminate. Because that's the real threat when it comes to civilian casualties, is that while the soldier on the weapon platform itself wants to take out just the enemy, and just the enemy alone, bullets don't. Bullets, explosives, shrapnel, fire, anything that can kill a person, it does not discriminate. We are all equal in the eyes of death. So when I see a lack of, when I see something that counteracts this, like Russia is supposedly botching this invasion so horribly that, units are just kind of running out of food, fuel, etc., vehicles getting abandoned by the side of the road, and the Ukrainians are pretty much taking advantage of that and, shipping it over. But in the same time, we're hearing supposedly about these high civilian casualties and, the terror horrors of war and whatnot. And I'm sitting here and I'm thinking, well, which story is actually true? Is this conflict so bad that, Russia is just launching bombs, rockets, missiles, everything they can to basically kind of break the civilian populace, and the Ukrainians are just dying left, right, and center. Or is the Russian military so incompetent that they can't actually leverage all this, and it's giving the Ukrainians a fighting chance? Now, I know a lot of you are probably just going to go, oh, he's claiming misinformation. Well, that's what I'm trying to raise the awareness of, is who is really misinforming you here? Who is actually reporting these stories? And this is kind of where I want to get back to the original point I was making. The race grifters are now starting to attach this whole narrative to the war itself, basically saying that the war itself and the attention it's getting is racist. One other article that I was talking about was like complaining about, how because it's a Eurasian conflict of one white nation against another, that it's taking the focus away from the race narrative back here and abroad. And the one narrative that I can find that it kind of links the two stories together is that reporters are basically reporting that this is such a terrible tragedy because it's happening in what is a historically white-dominated pair of nations. And they're using the term civilized a lot, and they're saying, like, that's what makes this such a large tragedy, because unlike, the Middle East and Africa, where those places are so far backwards and, and they're murdering everybody, this is like, this is supposed to be a civilized European nation, and the minorities are throwing their hands up in the air, screeching about racism and bigotry and bias and all that good fun stuff. Let me see. There was this line I once found in here, like this. This isn't a this isn't a place, with all due respect, like Iraq or Afghanistan, that has seen conflict raging for decades," said CBS News foreign correspondent Charlie Diagetta, referring to Ukraine. This is a relatively civilized European city. He later apologized. As other news outlets poured sympathy on Ukrainian victims, with interviewees and correspondents pointing out that, unlike Middle Eastern refugees, Ukrainian victims were white, Christian, middle class, blonde, and blue eyed. And the one article I read was like talking about how the writer in question was like, I can't identify with this because I'm a black woman, in Africa. And you're pointing out, that this is such a tragedy because it's in a civilized state, unlike Africa, which is, counteractive to the narrative that, like, all African nations are this broken, backwards land place, when it's Africa is, like, set to, oust the United States as, like, one of the most economically populous, nations in the history of the world, etc., etc., etc. It's like, that bothers me. It genuinely bothers me that there is, this horrible tragedy that's taking place in another nation where you have people killing other people, and for some reason the minorities just can't let go of the attention. They want the spotlight back on them. They want to be able to continue the grift. And in order to do that, they need to continue to label everything as racist, sexist, and they're the underdog in all this. Even when that's really what grinds my gears about all this. The underdog this time is the underdog this time is, as they said, a white middle class nation. Now, I'm going to be honest, I haven't really paid too much attention to Ukraine, so I don't know what the standards of living there are like or anything else, but it's still a whole thing when like, I'm not really gonna lie here. I'm an Army veteran myself. That's probably well known if you've been watching my videos for the past while here. But even I, can recognize when conflict itself is a tragedy. Because here's the main difference between myself and a lot of these new war hawks that are basically going around these days, is that, I can at least respect my enemy. I think that's a lost art in this day and age, is being able to respect your opponent. And yeah, I can even go back as far as World War II here, and I can say, you know what? I can respect that the Germans fought for what they believed in. I don't agree with it. And I would definitely, fight them because I don't agree with their ideology. But I can respect that they were willing to take up arms and fight for it. Because when you've got someone that is willing to lay down their life on a stance or an ideology or something, you've got to at least respect that. And some people probably ask me, I've ranted on about the progressives long enough, and they say, oh, are you going to respect them too? Well, the ones willing to actually stand up and fight for it, sure. The rest of them are probably just cowards. They'll run away at the first sign of trouble. I mean, you're looking at it right now. Everyone's like, oh, rah, rah, Ukraine and whatnot. But I sure as hell don't see a whole bunch of people basically buying airplane tickets to the nearest nations and going into Ukraine and fighting alongside the Ukrainians. Everybody is like, oh, we stand with Ukraine, but all we're really going to do is, ship money over to them. Well, what's Ukraine going to do with money if you're not going to send them actual war materials to fight with? It's like Ukraine's probably sitting on top of a whole bunch of money, but, what are they really going to do? They're going to, flood their economy with it? Are they going to, pay a whole bunch of money for native-born arms manufacturers to, I don't know, manufacture arms? They're going to dig more chemicals and other stuff out of the ground to put together Semtex plastic explosives and bullets? Make weapons? They're going to work overtime in the factories to make weapons and tanks and missiles and whatnot. You see, that even then, I'm going to reiterate, I am no expert on Ukraine. I don't even know what their industries produce. Are they even capable of producing this sort of thing? Are they really? If they are, what good is sending them a whole bunch of money? And realistically, you should be sending them, actual war materials. Bandages, bombs, there's this stuff that can be manufactured outside that particular zones, so the Russians don't have anything to target, and ship it into them that way via the supply lines, and then they'll be able to fight on the front lines. But, getting back to my original point on the race grift here, and it really kind of just torques me, is that even when, here is an actual conflict of lives being lost, and yet people can't seem to put the race grift down. It really shows kind of where their priorities are in life. Kind of goes to show that we've effectively kind of solved the race issue, but they can't put it down. They got to keep it going because that's what they built their livelihoods on. Yeah, I gotta say though, I mean, if you were, some people probably sit here and attack me and be like, "Oh, you were like a U.S. soldier. Shouldn't you be, fighting for Ukraine and throwing your support behind with the rest of us?" Well, you also have to remember that I'm an individualist, and because I think for myself, that's the reason why I got discharged in the first place. Also, because I respect my enemy. I can fight him, but at the same time, I respect him. I'm not going to sit there and demonize him. I realize that, I'm fighting somebody like me who is fighting for their beliefs, and even though I'm willing to kill them, I can at least respect them and humanitize them. And unfortunately, that doesn't really go a long way to winning you any sort of respect when everybody around you is trying to demonize everybody and make them subhuman. In my eyes, doing that itself makes you subhuman. People probably say, oh, you just support Russia. Well, I understand somewhat of what Russia is trying to do here, and I can respect them for that. Doesn't mean, that if for whatever reason, if we ever ended up in opposing sides in an actual conflict, well, that's what we're in now. No, we're not. Are there any U.S. boots in the ground in Ukraine? Well, no. Then why the fuck aren't you over there fighting if that's what you actually believe? As far as I'm concerned, I have no dog in this fight. I think that's really the stance the U.S. should be taking. I mean, if Ukraine wants to ask us for help and we really do like them as allies, sure, send them materials and everything. But I mean, send actual war materials, not money. Money's going to be useless. And if things really get bad, hey, we got a whole bunch of universities full of students who are out there wanting to get their life experience and whatnot. I mean, for fuck's sake, we had a whole fucking army ad about Emma and her two moms and how she answered the call on fighting for liberal democracy and whatnot. Send her. Send everybody who has expressed support in supporting Ukraine. Let them put their money where their mouth is. I signed up to defend my nation, and my nation decided it didn't want any of that. It said, "Nope, you're worthless. We don't care about you fighting for us." Well, okay, fine. I'll go ahead and sit this one out then. I've got no reason to fight now at this point. And I think a lot of people are kind of feeling the same way. I mean, especially now that you've got people that are trying to shift the narrative away from people dying in Ukraine. And, think about the minorities, think about the black people, think about the women and whatnot. And it's like, well, the women and children were all evacuated, and all men of fighting age were basically pulled off buses and conscripted, if you can believe that story. It's a mess. It's a giant mess. It's a tangled web of tales and stories and whatnot, and I'd love to be able to just go over there and untangle it and really see for myself exactly, what all's going on. Hell yeah, I'd go over there just to figure out what the actual truth is. Get in there. I'd love to go be a war correspondent and whatnot. I'd love to actually go across and talk to the Russians themselves and talk to the Ukrainians and, risk my life watching bullets buzz over my head to see, who's actually winning this fight. I would love to be able to do that. I would love to be able to really see for myself what's going on. But the thing is that even if, some eccentric, billionaire or whatnot actually saw this video and contacted me and said, I'd like to actually send you over there so you can report on what's actually going on and whatnot, I'd have a feeling that a lot of what I'd produce with bringing what is actually going on down there and recording everything and seeing it and getting both sides of the story and understanding why both sides are actually really fighting out there, I think it's probably going to run counterintuitive to whatever narrative the media and the state are basically trying to put together in order to kind of build this support that they've been wanting for years. And even if, I had all the backing in the world, being one person actually showing, posting videos, whatnot, and everything else, big tech would probably try to shut me down in a hurry. Because there's no telling what I would actually find at this point. And there may be a lot of contradictives to whatever story they're weaving. And as a storyteller myself, that I think is the greatest tragedy. Like, it's one thing, Tom and I have always kind of butted heads about this, and TK as well. They've always kind of butted heads with me about how, the loss of, fiction and storytellers is like, it's not that great a deal. And they always tell me, it's because we have real life stories of things centered on, things that actually happen, and like that's what we should be telling people. But when you have something like this where there's actual history in the making here, and you've got people that just don't care, and it's a big shame. We're losing our stories to the propaganda for the woke machine, which is a shame, because the thing is that you've got the well-known epics of yesteryear, Homer, Shakespeare, Tolkien most definitely recently. These were visionaries who put together stories that tried to help understand the culture of the time. So then we've got, in the U.S. we've got things like what's this? We've got the stories of like how NASCAR was born, of the moonshine runners, the stories, of the mobsters, of the whole Roaring 20s, Tommy guns and mafioso bosses, and prohibition and stuff like that. We have the westerns of the 1800s, Go West, Young Man, Go West, of how the lawless land was tamed and cultivated by hardy people. People are always complaining that we don't have enough strong, independent whammons who don't need no man. And I'm over here looking at the 1800s of the iconic trope of the widow with a shotgun. And I'm looking at them like, you fucking serious? Like, those are real women, that would go out there and work on the homestead, and they'd do all sorts of, dirty jobs, but they would do it with the grace, command, and finesse of a noble that, mystified everyone. It's like, how did you do that? And they ran that house like an iron fist. Like, we're talking real Margaret Thatcher kind of stuff just out there in the wilderness. Like, when they invited you in for dinner, because it was, considered polite to invite people, random strangers who just showed up looking for a place to sleep, they said, "No, come, eat. Let me stuff you full of good food, and you can have a place to sleep in the bunkhouse over there with the other men." Husband might have like 10, 20, hands working his land and whatnot, helping him with a living, and they'd have their families and whatnot. But the matriarchs ruled that kitchen with an iron fist, and you minded your manners around her, and she'd have you out on your ear. And that was also the thing, too. You see all these people, they're so afraid of guns. Not the widow with the shotgun. She knew where her husband, or her late husband, would keep the shotgun. Double-barrel buckshot, and she only needed the one. Never would have to fire that second shot, because she meant business with that first one, and you knew it. Most likely because you or one of your buddies was dead. This was especially true because the land was not hospitable, but even when the husband died, what did the woman do? No, she kept that house. She kept that land. She continued to run it until, her children came of age to inherit that ranch and whatnot. Eventually someone would screw it up, and a company would buy it and turn it into a parking lot or something, and, those are the kinds of tales there that we got that. And then now we have the modern epics, Tolkien, the entire Lord of the Rings series was an allegory for Tolkien's experiences in World War I. Tolkien was a soldier. That's right. A beloved fantasy author was actually a soldier for the British in World War I. And the whole Fellowship of the Ring was kind of his experiences and whatnot. Like, if you really think about it, like the whole scene of like Legolas and Gimli just sitting there, it's like, I never thought I'd die fighting side by an elf. What about side by side with a friend? And if you think about it, the animosity between like the French and the British, like in World War I could honestly see a Brit and a Frenchman who hundreds of years ago were fighting each other to death in the 100 Years' War and have had that animosity ever since, looking at each other, realizing, they're facing down the Germans and saying, Are we really going to die? Two enemies fighting side by side with each other, all these years. And they realized, you know what? Nah, but we can die side by side with a friend. And it's that kind of message. That's what it is. It's like when you sat there and you enjoyed Lord of the Rings as an allegory, the truth is that you were reading one man's interpretation of the horrors of an actual real war that happened, just kind of, with a different skin on it that makes it all the more memorable. And that's why the loss of all these modern IPs and whatnot is such a terrible tragedy. Like, I kind of watched, my ex kind of got me into Doctor Who, and, I kind of really got into it during Peter Capaldi's run, and I really liked Peter Capaldi. I really do. I mean, I really got into him when I was watching the BBC's The Three Musketeers and his portrayal of the Cardinal back then. And then, he kind of really got me invested into it. And then he made all these grand speeches while playing as the Doctor. And the big one was his scale model of war. And probably it hit me harder because, I am a veteran. And I'm sitting here looking at him going off and on about, what a model scale of war looks like and what the outcome of it actually is, and asking the big question, what comes after? And, Doctor Who is supposed to be this really silly sci-fi show of an alien who has a human companion and they just go off and have random adventures and whatnot. But when you look a little deeper, when you really kind of focus on the story that's being told, you realize how close it actually is to real life. And it makes you sit and wonder. And it really kind of made me sit and wonder there. I was young and desperate and in a time of need when I signed up for the service itself. And I thought I'd find the camaraderie and family and adventure that I was, craving as a youth. But then, I kind of got older and I was in my late 20s, and it kind of just hit me. It's like, when all is said and done and the dust settles in war, what really comes next? And I asked that question. I got a video. I made a video about that, where we listened to the Malcolm X speech that somebody, and a dumbass literally, pulled up and said, you need to listen to the speech because it's thought-provoking and whatnot. And I said, all right, I don't like you. I don't really respect you. But I'm going to actually do you a favor. I'm going to sit down and listen to that speech. And, I have to admit, it was a really great speech and whatnot. And he was all fire and brimstone about how the white man was the enemy and all that good fun stuff. And, I said, that's a nice speech and all, Malcolm X. But if I could ask you that one question, what comes after? And I have to wonder what he would say. What are you actually fighting for? And if you win, what comes after that? And that's the question I would ask any kind of revolutionary. It's any question that I would ask, anybody who supports Ukraine, or anybody that supports Russia for that matter. It's like, great, your support is all well and good. But what happens when your side wins? Like, the people, like, say Ukraine does win their conflict. And there's a number of win conditions. I mean, that's a whole spiel I could go into, and it kind of got into a side tangent about Ruby and whatnot, and how that pisses me the fuck off. But maybe we'll get into that another time if I get asked about it. But, it's like, what are the win conditions? Well, realistically, the win conditions I see at this is that Ukraine manages to kick Russia out and you pretty much tell them, don't come back. I don't really see Ukraine kind of launching any real counter-invasion and, taking Russian territory. I don't see that being feasible, because if that does happen, I know that Russia's going to answer with the full force of the Russian Federal Army. And seeing, having seen that advertisement, having seen that recruiting advertisement as well, a whole bunch of people did comparisons of like China's most recent advertising campaign to recruit new soldiers for the People's Liberation Army, or the Russian Federation's their federational army. Like, seeing those and knowing like that's what I'm going to be facing should the army have ever been mobilized and proper. Yeah, I don't see Ukraine winning against that. I don't see Ukraine winning against that. I really don't. And the only way that's going to happen is if they join NATO and they petition NATO to throw the entire support up there, meaning the United States war machine gets brought into that. And considering the advertisement that the U.S. did, The Calling, with Emma and her two moms, and just seeing what I've seen in terms of the degradation of the U.S. military in question. To me, I think that's kind of the Hail Mary that Putin would be counted for if this really does go sideways and Ukraine manages to kick Russia out. But no, I think the more reliable win condition is for Ukraine to literally kick the Russian expeditionary force out and say, and don't come back. Really kind of make old Vlad think twice about trying this shit again. Because that's really what I see this is that this is not the Russian military in full force getting down and dirty with business. This is a fucking expeditionary force. This is a probe. Like, they have the manpower and equipment to call this a singular thing a probe. Everyone else will call it an invasion so they can, get points for it. God damn, I've really gotten off track about this whole thing and kind of just talking about it. Where was I? Oh, yeah, but victory condition. So that's the most reliable victory condition. So, in other words, victory is pretty much just status quo, realistically speaking. But if I could ask the supporters, that it's like, okay, Ukraine succeeds in their victory condition. What do you expect to happen? They'll probably sit here and tell, oh, we want to see the collapse of Vladimir's whole thing just as a result of the Ukrainians kicking him out. And I'm going to be like, yeah, I don't see that happening. That's wish fulfillment. And they're like, no, it's going to happen. No. That's wish fulfillment. That's not going to happen. Yeah, that's my whole thing. It's like, counter invade with what? They'll probably say, the Ukraine, like, we should send our forces over there and all our troops and everything. I was like, we should send the great American war machine into Russia through Ukraine and slap Vlad in the face and knock him off the thing. Well, we'll punch the Nazi Vladimir Putin, the evil the evil Nazi who subverted the election of Donald Trump, and right the wrong of history. Yeah, I don't see that really happening. I really don't. Sorry, not happening. They'll probably try to slander me and call me a supporter and, supporter of Putin and a Nazi and everything else. But the thing is that I can sit here comfortably and tell you things that are more realistic. And that's the other problem I really have with, the progressives and whatnot. You try to, it is a shame about Ukraine. It really is. And I do hope that they get through this okay. But at the same time, you've got to understand their realistic limitations. And I think that's, one of the problems we have with this particular generation is that nobody kind of sat them down and talked to them with realistic, what happens when reality actually hits you. I don't think it's really going to hit them until, their boots on the ground in Ukraine. I have no dog in that fight, so don't expect me to go over there and do anything about it. Yeah. Only reason that would happen is if, the movie Red Dawn actually happened. Russia or China or some other manages to actually put boots in California or something. I'd probably say the coastal Californians will welcome him in. The inland Californians will probably just, actually put up a fight and whatnot. If that was the actual case, then you'd see me headed west to go, push the invaders off U.S. soil. Ah. All right, yeah, so just kind of wrapping this up because I'm running out of things here. So, that's the problems I have with this entire thing itself, and really kind of what I want to point out is the hypocrisy, is that, even I got a little bit distracted in this video here, that they're trying to shift the attention over to the Middle East away from the problems at home. And I think that's one thing that I think I can actually thank the race grifters for, is basically taking the attention off the problems at home and saying there's still a racist problem that we need to address. Well, you're half right. There are problems at home we need to address. The fact that you exist is one of them, because the issue of race, I believe, has long since been solved. The problem is now that you just can't seem to find a living away from that. And the fact that you're trying to take away from what is an actual tragedy. Yes, conflicts in the Middle East, a great tragedy. You've got people killing each other for no damn reason over there, or for outlandish reasons of religion that make no sense. That's the problem there. And people are probably saying, that Africa is better than, we think as well. All right, cool. Go to Africa. Bring me actual footage of it. Show me that things are getting better. Realistically, because I've actually talked to a bunch of people from South Africa, they'll say things are not necessarily getting better as we think. They're fighting for their homes and their lives every day. I kind of always have to wonder if one of my former squad members in Cyclone 1-2 in the 501st, I kind of have to wonder, if one day I'm just not going to end up hearing from him anymore. Because something happened. I'd never know about it. And it'd be a shame, because I really like the guy. I think he's a great guy. But even then, I don't know. I don't know his situation in full. I've never really thought to ask. But he does live in South Africa, and things are not good, according to him. I always kind of have to worry about that. See, that's the human connection, the race grifters don't seem to understand. When you actually know people down there, you kind of worry about them. Like, I've gotten to know the guy. He's a pretty good guy all around. He's pretty solid. He was with me for, the duration there. I literally trained him up to play the game and fight alongside me, and he's fought with me in many a campaign. Like, I think out of the near 100 operations I fought in Cyclone 1-2, I think he was there for like 60 of them. So, we've known each other for quite a while. Alright, well, I think I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up. So, just remember, people, don't let them take the narrative away. Don't let them distract you with the narrative, because it really is. Don't lose sight of what the problems really are. Or maybe I'm just screaming into the void about that.